Citizen 12 is brought to you by Complexify, a social purpose corporation founded to support you living in alignment with your conscience and discerning what that is. Find out more at complexify.org. complexiphy.org.
Hello, citizens. My name is Paige Hulsey.
And my name is Emily Bogen, and
this is episode 9 of the Citizen 12 podcast.
Citizen 12 is not a program or health treatment, but an inclusive place, common ground to share and learn. If you have not yet listened to episode 0, we invite you to do that. You'll get a good sense of what this show is about and hear our steps, which were inspired by Alcoholics Anonymous, and those can be also found through any of our sites.
A little more of a preface. This show, this content may stir stuff up for you. In some ways, that's part of the point, but also we want to acknowledge that this can be hard, uncomfortable, even disruptive. Please engage with us responsibly and don't be on your own with stuff. Be in touch if that's the right thing. We care about you. It's why we're making the show.
Our podcast is created in Seattle, Washington. We acknowledge this as Duwamish land and strive to honor the past, present, and future Indigenous lives here. Citizen 12 supports Duwamish tribal services by paying real rent. Find out more at realrentduwamish.org.
Today's show is all about decision making. Before we really jump in, I'm going to say that we are having some construction near our recording area, and so we will do our best to minimize interruptions to the show, but we can only do what we can do. Okay, lately in the show, we've been talking about responsibility, and a key aspect of responsibility is related to what is often thought of as decision making. And we actually had a listener request for this topic, and it's a great one, which is why we're going to spend today's episode about it. Thank you to our listener who asked for it. I see responsibility or being responsible in conjunction with making decisions or choices, in conjunction with my third step foundation, as like inseparable. Like, I don't know. I mean, like, they're one and the same. I don't know how I can do one without the other. For me, living as though I've taken a third step, it's borne out in how I make choices. Again, our third step is surrender how we live to what we trust to guide us. In this episode, we're first going to talk about common barriers to responsible choosing, both internal barriers and external barriers. And then we'll talk some about our top workarounds, including prayer and meditation and some structured self-talk. Then we'll address in our follow-up show common hang-ups and pitfalls. And today and in that follow-up show, we'll share some of our personal experiences with these subjects. And we know we're a little repetitive in this show, but it seems just to be part of how intertwined all of this material is. Mm-hmm. And so please stick with us. And if you have any suggestions, please write in. Was there something you were going to add?
No, just acknowledging that we know we've brought up the third step before, but this really did seem like just something to examine a little bit more.
And I think we will keep talking about the third step.
Absolutely.
I mean, in my work, for sure, it's a common place to return to re-examine and like recommit, sort of. I think there a few common spots in the 12 steps that are like that. And all of them can be like that we return to focus again on. But 3 seems like a very common one.
For me, it's true in my life. Like it's not easy for me to stay grounded in a perfect third step. Like I still have a big part of me that wants to do my own will.
I'm shocked, Emily.
Yeah.
That was
Can
sarcasm.
you tell?
Well, not just because of that, but like you're a person.
Yeah.
And that's my sense of people.
Mm-hmm. It's so hard.
That the third step is very contrary to our nature, to our automatic.
Our desires so much of the time.
Yeah. And this is why we're talking about
This is why we're talking about it today. Yeah.
And I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about how I have made and how I make choices. And I'm going to start with sort of before I had taken a third step, and not that I sat around thinking about how I made decisions. For one thing, I was very young when I took my first third step, as I have said in this program before. But looking back, if I recall correctly, I think really mostly how I made choices was just by trying to talk to myself or think to myself about, well, what do I want or what do I feel like doing? And I'm going to use exercising, like working out, as an example. I took my first third step, if I'm not mistaken, in 1999. I was 19 years old. And I had exercised before that in my life, worked out, but I really, by and large, would exercise. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering accurately, I basically would work out or exercise when I felt like it. And if I didn't feel like it, I wasn't doing it. And if I didn't want to, I wasn't. And if I wanted to, or maybe sort of a little bit felt like I should or had to or something, but really, like, my life before a third step looked like, what do I feel like doing?
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. That seems to be, when I look at the world, that looks like mostly how people are, or a lot of how people are making choices.
It's either what do I feel like doing, or being very aware of, like, even though I feel like doing this bad thing probably will happen. So I'm afraid of that happening. So I'm not going to do this.
Oh, so a little more like managing outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which common, similar, still not third step.
Right.
Right.
Can be mistaken maybe.
Yeah.
As that.
Yeah. So also, I just want to point out that all of that, like, well, do I feel like exercising? That the whole like frame there is me thinking about myself. Me, Paige, consulting with Paige, and Paige's feelings and thoughts and wants. And it's very self-focused. Like, there's no consideration of other people or like external consequences for others, or I don't know. I mean, it's really just very self-focused.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I'll say a little bit about kind of the next category I think of, which is when I'm living as though I haven't taken a third step. So even though I took a third step in 1999, of course, many times, many moments, I guess that's a good thing to say, I see the third step as either kind of being practiced, being honored in every moment, or not. So even though, yes, I like made a decision, I made a prayer, I had some ceremony in 1999, and it definitely was like a turning point that, has played out in every moment of my life since then. It's a long time ago now, almost 20 years ago. So many of those moments, I have not been living as though I'd made that change.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this because I think it's really useful for me to be able to get comfortable noticing and acknowledging when I'm living as though I haven't taken a third step.
How do you mean it's played out? Are you saying it's played out despite whether or not you're choosing to live in it somehow? Like, has it made some impact whether or not?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think I mean for sure since 1999, I have said to myself, well, do I feel like working out? You know what I mean? Now, in some ways, that's like me still living as though I haven't taken a third step. When I consult, for me, I don't surrender my life to my desires and feelings. Some people may find that that's what's worthy of their trust and devotion in their life. That is not at all the case for me. But do I default sometimes still to consulting with my desires and wants? Of course. For me, I think of that as living as though I'm not doing a third step, haven't taken a third step. Does that make sense? Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. Often so let's say now when I notice that I'm living as though I haven't taken a third step, it's less even that very self-centered, like, well, what do I feel like? And it's even more probably common that I'm just doing what is habit for me now, or even like what's prescribed externally or something. So while that can look different than just doing what I feel like doing, yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like living in alignment with what my conscience would have me do. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Which is why we're talking about this stuff. It's sticky. There's no easy way, or for me, I haven't found an easy way of living in alignment with what I trust to guide me, which, as I've said in this show, is my conscience, that I often also call God.
You have to really have a real interest in what that entity wants, whatever it is.
I would go, yes, now, well, that's interesting. So I do have that interest now. I don't think I always did. In fact, a lot of my time, and I think I've said this before, I was like, I don't want to know what my conscience wants of me because it's probably going to be different than what I want. And that's ugly or hard to deal with. And I still made steps toward living more in alignment with my conscience, even like despite my resistance to it. So I think it sure helps. It sure makes the medicine go down better now that I'm like, well, I even am grateful, really grateful for the guidance I get for those invitations from my conscience, and like excited for them. But I also have like decades of experience of having that go really well to show me that it's safe and lovely. So a lot of times people talk about, well, that it takes so much faith, and I don't know, honestly, like I feel like I have evidence to show me why it's good and works. For me, it doesn't take that much faith. It would take way weirder amounts of faith to like think my wants were going to give me a good life, because I have virtually no evidence that my wants produce a good life for me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That would take faith.
I mean, it takes something, because like this is hardwired, if you talk about it in like an evolutionary way, like if you're trying to remove yourself from harm and feel comfortable and good and safe, it makes sense that how hardwired we are to consult,
like trust our urges or
drives.
To
trust our urges, our desires, what might make us feel good, what might put us in a comfortable spot. And I mean, it really takes doing something different. I mean, I'm emphasizing that because I think when I first took this step, I don't think I was so aware of the two separate paths. Like, and I don't think it's super like black and white or duality or whatever, but like it is something else. And like,
it is distinct.
In a lot of ways, it takes doing something that sometimes that really doesn't feel right or feel good. And so
that's a good point too. We're kind of bringing in stuff from later in the show, which is fine.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's a great point. And frequently I find myself reminding people, and I don't know if you are of the right age bracket that you ever watched like after school specials. Did you ever like come home from school and there was like almost like a whole episode of a TV show that was like a PSA almost, where it was like some moral message? No, doesn't ring a bell. Okay. Well, my recollection was that in the 80s, there were like after school specials, TV shows that were like made to help teach kids messages, moral messages.
Okay. Yeah, no.
And frequently people remember that a message, and even in like sitcoms and stuff, when they would have a moral, it was that doing the right thing didn't necessarily feel good.
Mm-hmm.
People would do the right thing, quote unquote, the right thing. And then afterwards they'd be like, oh, that was hard or tiring or whatever. And it was like, oh yeah, doing the right thing, it doesn't always feel good. Duh.
Yeah, but still they'd get like a reward of some kind. I mean, they'd be at least they'd be a hero.
I don't know. I feel like my recollection of after school specials was the message that doing the right thing doesn't necessarily feel good. No reward. I mean, maybe this is some 90s additives.
I think this is some 90s barriers. I mean, like
that they told you were going to get treats if you did the right thing.
Well, when Zach Miller on Saved by the Bell finally did the right thing, like he got to like hook up with Kelly or something like that. Some good, I don't know.
Some victory. Yeah.
Some sort of
my
victory.
experience in life is that that's not really how it works. That often doing the right thing, it feels like exertion. It feels like effort. And, some of us have a pretty distorted relationship to effort, also known as laziness or sloth or whatever. Mm-hmm. It has been part of growing up for me to develop a different relationship to effort, where effort itself doesn't necessarily equal like that clue about danger, harmful discomfort.
Right. And I think what helps, and I already wanted to kind of go back to it, is when you were talking about being self-focused and how being self-focused can definitely help to like lead you into more being guided more by how you feel. Like being God-focused or conscience-focused, I think, is something that has grown for me, so what God is interested in, and I'm just going to say God.
Yeah.
What God is interested in, like, it wasn't really like a part of, it was all in the beginning of taking a third step. It was more how is God interested in me and my life? And it was still self-focused, it was like something a little bit different, but it was still about me. And I had to grow in the awareness of God might want something that has nothing to do with me at all. And becoming interested in that is kind of, it's hard because there's some self-sacrifice there.
So just to clarify, it sounds like what you're talking about is that your ability to consider what your conscience or God might ask of you has grown. So in the beginning, you had kind of a small idea of what God might want for you. And as you have grown and developed, what you can consider God might be asking of you has expanded. Is that what you're saying?
I think I'm just saying I'm considering God more and like what God's desires are more.
Sure, yeah. I
mean,
mean,
that's helped me a little bit to kind of wrap my head around like why I might do something that is very uncomfortable for me.
Another thing I want to add is that I kind of think about this thing about like the steps playing out or the principles playing out. The picture I use in my mind is like piano keys, which is probably not the best image, but it has worked for me. So, naming steps makes it sound like you're going to like walk up one step and then you're going to walk up to a different step and be on a different step. I think of it more like pressing down a piano key. So if I've taken a first step, then I have that key held down. And if I'm still practicing the first step, that key stays depressed. So for me, having taken all the steps, I think of it like I've got all 12 keys pressed down all the time. That's how I think of like keeping all of the principles active and alive in my life. You're laughing.
Because then it creates a song.
Well, 12 keys might be a little much. We don't have that many fingers.
A symphony.
Yes, a symphony of spiritual principles.
That is what I think we're getting to here.
Wow, that's pretty corny sounding.
I had to say.
But the idea, the concept, of it's not, these are not one-time thing. Like, yes, there was a one-time occasion in 1999 for me. But that, I don't know how much difference that would make in my life if I just took my finger off that key after I finished making that prayer, right? It's about keeping my life in alignment with the principle of surrender.
I think this is why I've never, ever questioned, am I done with these steps?
Totally.
And that's never been the experience for me. Like, I've never had well, that's not true. I've had spiritual practices where I'm like, okay, I just know deep down that this is something that I've integrated into my life.
Yeah. But that would even mean itself that you've got the piano key depressed, and it's just depressed enough that you don't have to keep hitting it or something.
Right. Yeah.
And that, so, I mean, to me, that does sound like integration. Last, to wrap up this section about like how I make decisions, thankfully I have a third area, which is when I am making choices like in alignment with that I have made a surrender, that I am living as though I, am putting my life in the hands of my conscience. And unsurprisingly, after all what we've just said, for me, the access to that is checking afresh all the time. And you might say, well, checking with what? And so I can simply say, well, checking with my conscience. Now, obviously, hearing what it is that my conscience wants of me is a complicated thing. We've talked about that a lot in this show, and we will continue to, and we're going to talk about it more today. But really, I have as yet had very few things that I have gotten like long-term guidance about. Actually, I joke that I don't ask God about brushing my teeth anymore. And that's almost the only thing. And somebody might just think that is, you listener might just think that is the wildest thing for me to say, that I would check with God about everything else other than brushing my teeth, because obviously my day and life is made up of mostly things that aren't brushing my teeth. But that is actually my point, is that what has seemed to work to actually ensure that I'm living in alignment with my conscience is being in a practice of continuing to check afresh what is there for me to do now.
It's not like it's to me, it's kind of like more like a really interesting conversation, right? Like you're just staying in this conversation with your conscience or God or whatever you want to call it. And it's really interesting.
That's a beautiful way of saying it.
So it's not like a burden.
No.
Right.
It's a delight.
It's kind of nice. Yeah.
It's
very nice.
It's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are barriers to it that can make it seem like a burden or a threat. And we're going to talk about that.
Yes.
In fact, we'll just talk about it now.
Yay.
So we're going to talk about internal barriers, like internally arising barriers, and then we'll talk about external barriers. So, and really, we've already touched on it. I don't know how to say it more strongly. And I don't know how much of this is from our culture, like our current culture where we live and how we were raised. I'm thinking of especially consumerism. We are pressed from every side, from the outside, to be pressed from outside to have our internal focus on ourselves and our wants and our preferences. Early in, well, I shouldn't even say that. At some point when I started to try to get a good glimpse of what my internal monologue was with myself, like what did my thinking sound like, it took a while for me to even be able to hear what I was saying to myself internally. That was a practice in and of itself. What I noticed was that I talked to myself a lot about, I like that, I don't like that. Yes, that's good. No, that's bad. You know what I mean? I mean, that made up a large bulk of what was running through my mind. I want that, I don't want that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't even know if that's different now. That's not the point for me. Mm-hmm. The point is that I am striving to not make decisions and choices based on that, like, radio channel that's just on all the time, spewing wants and preferences and information about stuff.
Mm. Yes. It's still there for me. Definitely.
Totally.
Every day, throughout the day. It's definitely a voice, many voices. But yeah, it's not about, now it's the addition. It's the additional practice of monitoring those voices.
And having them be in their right. I mean, for me, yeah, it's not about like ending that. That actually seems futile. I see that people seem to think that that is necessary. I just have not, that's not been my adventure. It seems okay. It seems okay that I just still have that same monologue inside. It doesn't preclude me from making choices based on other stuff.
Right.
It's like it can keep talking. I don't have to listen to it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Talk. Yeah.
Talk.
Totally. My internal monologue still may say, I don't want to exercise. That's just not that's not what I listen to tell me whether I should exercise or not anymore. A big key here with these internal and external barriers actually is the degree to which I'm attached. I don't know if I can stress it enough. And I guess that's what I'm talking about, is having that monologue be in its right role.
Right.
For me, I mean, I said another way, that's me only not, like basically not attached. And it used to be, I guess this is good for me to say, I thought that monologue was me. I thought that was who I am. I don't know if I knew that I was made of anything other than what that radio station had on. And now, honestly, I not that I ignore it or I think it's bad. I think you can hear me acknowledging it's not that it's bad.
Has some nice parts to it.
It's fine. It's just fine. Honestly, I just don't relate to it as though it's very personal to me. I mean, obviously it's part of me.
It's memory. Isn't it just memory?
I don't know what it is. Right. I just don't, and sometimes it's a little bit interesting, but it just doesn't.
It has personality.
Sure, whatever. Like it's some spice or something, like it's a little bit of interest or something, but it has never proven that it is something reliable to show me how to live my life.
Right.
So I don't know where this quote came from. I hadn't planned to bring it up here, but please, if somebody knows. But people talk about being, well, I maybe it's a garment, wear life like a loose garment. Have you heard that?
No.
So I don't know if that says exactly what I'm trying to say, but I think about being lightly attached to my wants and preferences and desires. It's not so they don't have to burn away, but they're also not steering the boat. Wow, this is a lot of mixed metaphors now. I just stay loosely attached to them. They can just be how they are and not necessarily let them run my life.
Right. I think about it a lot in terms of like my stories, like the stories that have been created, the narratives that have been created, and it's helped me a lot to just sort of look at them like that.
Like they're fine how they are, but with a loose attachment.
Loose attachment, knowing that they are constructs. They're very much constructs, and sometimes it helps to do some deconstruction. Absolutely, especially if you're an obsessively minded person, as I am. I need that. Yeah, I need to deconstruct sometimes.
And I think of deconstructing as synonymous with like, well, I actually talk about using a crowbar to like pry in between me and my attachment. And I talk about like using a crowbar to make space for God. Paige like gets all stuck together and I need, my attachment, my ego, my fears, my preferences. And sometimes it takes like getting a crowbar in there to eke a little space.
Oh, yeah. Some of these things are really deeply ingrained. We learn them from our families. We learn them from our great-great-grandparents. I think about just like coping mechanisms, things that we do to comfort ourselves. For instance, I really like a latte, but that one that I don't make, right? And that is not something that I've that's not something that was added to my life anytime recently. Like comforting myself via warm liquid is like, I'm sure,
prehistoric.
Yes. And And that's an attachment.
Oh, interesting.
I watch myself have that conversation about, no, I want a latte. I want a latte for my day so I can feel comfortable showing up. And some of them are just a lot more hardwired than others.
Sure.
And I think it is really important for me, it's been really nice to be like, okay, well, yeah, this is old. This is an old attachment.
And habit, too.
And habit, which has become a habit, and it's not going to be comfortable to say no to myself.
Well, let's maybe even for now say it would be uncomfortable to even use the crowbar to make space to listen afresh for what might be the right thing. And I know this is hard to get our heads around. It has been for me, but I would assert that there are times ahead for you where it's totally okay, maybe even the right thing
to have
a latte.
Oh, yeah.
And then there may be times where it's not the right thing to have a latte. And honestly, as inconvenient as this is, without this practice and willingness and interest in checking afresh, I don't know how we would ever know. My experience is that I like hope for the best and just like, say, oh, well, sorry, a bunch of those were the wrong thing.
Yeah,
oh, well.
Sorry, oops. Got a latte, wasn't
gonna keep doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, this checking a fresh thing, it's a big deal. So I'm glad you brought up that like prehistoric thing. That leads us pretty nicely into our next topic of external barriers. And I want to acknowledge, I don't know if it's my personality or if it's something deeper than my personality or maybe even shallower than my personality, but some of us are more inclined to like put our inside pressure in charge, and some of us are more inclined to put like outside expectations in charge. And I just am bent the way to make my own preferences and desires, that self-focus. But I have observed that, well, it's not all black and white. So obviously there are times when I have automatically made decisions based on outside expectations and not my internal desires. But some of us are much more inclined to make decisions in reflex to outside expectations.
Yes. I would even go so far as to say that there's a ways of kind of knowing where you, like which one you're more likely to participate in.
Tell us.
My hunch is that the people like myself and you who are more involved in internal drives are like the consequences of that, of following those, are going to be a lot more unmanageability that is like visible. And
interesting.
And that people who are more inclined to make decisions based on what the community wants and what society wants are going to
internal invisible costs.
Those are the people, and I know a lot of them that are going to have like breakdowns and like, but things are going to look okay on the outside because they're doing whatever that they're supposed to be doing.
That matches with my experience, although I've never put it together like that. And that's really interesting. That looks like that might. I think I agree.
My hunch. Yeah.
I think I agree. And I want to think more about that, in what ways that might be useful to see it that way. I think you've already been able to hear through what we're talking about that the kind of external barriers that we're talking about to making responsible choices are like, similarly to if I just think, well, what do I want? Do I want to exercise? No. Well, for me, it would be just as, what's a good word? Problematic for me to say, well, what am I supposed to do? Let me look in the, U.S. rowing team manual for how much training I'm supposed to be doing. And then I'm supposed to be doing that. And then having then being firmly attached to what I'm supposed to do. So that would be like an example of an external barrier to me checking with myself or my conscience.
Right. And not just the manual, like what does the health.org say we're supposed to be doing as far as exercise? Like what does, the best doctor in the world say about how often we're supposed to exercise.
Or not the best doctor. Maybe
Whatever.
just like Dr. Phil or Oprah or like whatever's popular or whatever anybody's talking about right now. Sure, what Instagram seems to think we should be doing in terms of exercise today. Sure.
I say that because sometimes especially with like science and things that are more objective seeming, that can get sticky.
So, and we are going to come back to, so information gathering is a legitimate part of making responsible choices.
Absolutely.
And similarly to the internal barriers, it isn't that external information is wholly bad or problematic or the wrong thing. That would be too easy, right? It's not that we just throw away all the outside information.
That would also just be insane.
It would, obviously that would just be insane, yes.
We don't know that we can live without that.
Oh no, there's no chance.
No.
I actually know we can't live without that. There's no chance
and
of
we don't
that.
want to not.
No. And really it may be that our internal wants and preferences are similar. They're a needed part of life. They're not going anywhere. They're fine. For me, it's that responsible choosing doesn't look like rigidly over depending on either category. And I actually am going to take this opportunity to talk just for a moment about dependence and over dependence, and another one of my little visualizations. So interdependence, wonderful, critical, important part of life. When I think of interdependence, I imagine like myself standing up and maybe like resting my hand on something or my elbow or, use like leaning a little bit on something to stay upright. When I think of overdependence, and on anything, this could be on anything, right? Overdependence on my own desires. If the desire changed or went away, that I would fall over. For me, that's like how I visualize if I'm overdepending, is if the support went away, would I fall or would I stay standing up? And I really aim to stand up on my own, to spread the weight around among my feet and maybe a little support over with this hand on this thing over here and, sharing of support, but not leaning too heavily on any one thing, such that if it went away, I would fall. And, that's a mental exercise. Or maybe emotional is a better way of saying it. It takes some consideration for me to know or to have reflected on, well, am I over depending on my home? If my home went away, would I fall? I'm actually interested in living as though not devaluing. I've already said on the show, I love my home, but that I think it's a durable way to proceed, and it seems available and possible to kind of remind myself and trust that if my home went away, which it could, fires, rent increases, all kinds of ways my home could go away, that I could still stand. I could still be standing.
Not to say it wouldn't be difficult.
Of course
you would
not.
mourn. You would probably go through a long process of mourning.
Yes, all kinds of feelings and disruption and upset. And please hear me. I am not inviting my home to go away. I really have found that there's a way to check my degree of attachment. And really, maybe I should have tabled this for the meditation category. For me, this kind of work falls under meditation.
Mm-hmm. So falling is not so much like knowing what your own fall is. Like for me, fall would be to be no longer interested in living this way. That's like one indicator of
interesting.
What a fall would be for me, like really falling over. And I think we all have different thresholds. Yeah. I think that's important. Yeah. Knowing like you can take a certain level of discomfort when you become detached from something you're depending on.
Yeah. And again, it's, I don't know if I really have great language for it. I like the term lightly attached. Mm-hmm. Detached doesn't quite seem right. I'm not detached from my home. I just aim to be lightly attached. Mm-hmm. That seems like the healthiest, most durable is one word, but also it like makes it makes space for me to enjoy my home while not being burdened by it.
Mm-hmm.
And we could substitute my marriage, we could substitute my physical health, we could substitute all kinds of things in there. Okay, so all this talk about barriers, and if you have gotten lost in all of our words, you might be saying to yourself, well, wait, barrier to what? And I think I really see these all, again, as barriers to being responsible. That's what I'm talking about. It's not just, I mean, it is the third step, practicing the third step, but for me, what practicing the third step is actually being responsible. And for me, that's really everything. That's empowerment and peace of mind. If I make a decision based on anything, internal, external, whatever, right? Like the decision is based on the reason, then really that thing is responsible for me in my life because I made the choice based on that thing. And my experience is that living that way with reasons, whether they were good or bad, whether they were the I don't know who you think is reliable for, the Lancet. I don't know, it's a medical journal or a health journal. I can't think of I don't know who you think would be reputable. Scientific American or the Atlantic or something, like whether I make a decision based on some good reputable source or some, Instagram post, some casual Instagram post, I'm not being responsible for my life, right? And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in developing me being responsible. We thought we would talk again a little bit about some of how this has played out for us. Mm-hmm. And Emily, you had told me that, when we were preparing for the show, that there have been some areas of life where we both feel like it's been easier to create this lightly attached than others.
Yeah.
And I actually think do you want to say?
I brought it up when we were talking about the episode, and I decided that I wanted to share this part of my life to give an example. So I think when it comes to eating, like my relationship with food, I've had both internal and external cues,
of
guys,
course,
right?
As we all do.
So I've always been a very I'm always loved food. I'm an indulgent person, so I'm definitely someone who fully enjoys like any sort of snack or any. God, I love it. And like anyone who knows or loves me knows that. Like I can get pretty indulgent, very Marie Antoinette, right? But then I also have, when it came to food, really like a reverence for the external cues as well. So seeing in the magazines, and, one of my characteristics being that I'm kind of vain. So, or just plain old vain, not sort of kind of, definitely vain. So, and, hearing my father kind of talk about health and, wanting very much to like live up to my father's standards of, all my father's standards. So there's like him being an external thing, society, and, what our ideas of how our bodies should look. I was also a ballerina growing up. So definitely there's a standard of what my body should look like then. So from a really young age, I think it was right before I entered my 9th grade, I became like extremely obsessed about what I ate. And it just really became the focus, right? And so that's kind of how I've been able to know that it's an area that like needed some crowbarring, right? Because like when you're just hyper focused on one thing, no one wants to live that way. And so I'm 31 now, so that was, however you do the math, a long time ago. So what's helped me is, and what I've just noticed actually, is that since I've been doing this work, I've seen myself being able to monitor what I want, is what I want to eat and also what I think I should eat. And I'm hearing that conversation, and my response to it has just drastically changed. It's to a point where I finally reached a place of, I guess, people talk about balance, and that's kind of, I think, what I have found. So yes, I'm indulgent sometimes. And yes, like I respond to, what I think I should be eating that day in order to, like, shed a couple of pounds, but it's no longer taking up too much of my life. It's just where I feel like it's just the size of a matter that it should be, so that it doesn't interrupt me, so that I can put more energy into things that I actually care about. And it kind of just feels beautiful to me, like in a way, like, because there's like this self-acceptance there, and like a way of life that I always kind of dreamed of or thought would be like a beautiful way of life. And in contrast, before, it was a lot more, well, obsession just isn't very lovely. It's not, I never wanted to be somebody who, like, wasn't comfortable with themselves and didn't allow themselves to have something, or accept a gift, like a cupcake if someone gave it to me, or whatever it was, and so it's been like a very long road, and I see a lot of people struggle with this. And so and I could be more specific about exactly how I got here, but really it was about, like, just understanding that conversation, just understanding that there's things that I would really like to have, and like kind of on the opposite token, like things I shouldn't have. And
you're talking about food things?
Yeah, food things. And
will you actually tell us about, like, food today?
Yes.
Just as an example,
okay.
Like, how did you choose what you've eaten today?
Mm-hmm. So so my body needs fat to feel grounded, to not get anxious. And so that's why I've really been liking lattes lately, especially because they have, like, I love coffee, but my coffee needs some fat in it. And so I've found that I can put, like, coconut butter in my coffee to make it more metabolical for me. I don't know if that's a word. If I don't have fat in my coffee, I get, like, anxiety symptoms. And so I did that, and then I had a couple of things in my refrigerator, and I knew that I was going to come and do this podcast, so I knew that I should put something in my stomach, and because that fuels me. And I, you just kind of, for me, there's this, like, I guess you could call it my conscience, God, is sort of there, and the voice is like, don't overthink it, don't, just do what, keep in mind your health, but also keep in mind that you need some fuel, and some and how much time you have.
Yep, consideration of what is
Paige,
at hand.
right? Like, like, you can't make a full-on breakfast because you've made a commitment, and, like, that's kind of where the responsibility piece lies for me. Is, yeah.
So actually, let me talk. Can I talk you into this a little bit?
Yeah.
So it's funny when I asked the question, you kind of started with a bunch of, like, reasons still back to like, well, I want some fat so that I can feel not anxious. I think it's, to some extent, language semantics.
Right. Well, God doesn't want me to feel anxious.
Well, right. So I think you and I, we're just not in the habit of talking like this. But
God
I think
doesn't want me.
Well, no. So that's not what I don't know about that. What I was hearing more was that you could have also said that would be as accurate is, today I valued taking good care of myself, and I ate consistent with my values.
Right.
Period. We're not used to talking like that. But that is what you said. What you said was, I'm committed to showing up optimally for my obligations in a good state of mind without compromising time and money.
Or other people's
Or
schedules.
other people's time and money or schedules. And that's it. And I think that's really powerful. I actually think we would be well served if we maybe talked like that more. You know, because in a little bit, like, it could almost sound like you ate in fear of anxiety. And I don't think that's what you did. I don't think you were like, oh no, I'll feel anxious if I don't eat fat, so I'm going to eat fat. But it's a fine line between powerfully choosing to take good care of ourselves.
Really what the experience for me was is that I felt a lot of gratitude because I've come to be able to sort of know what's right for me, I guess.
I also heard that you have learned enough about yourself and how you operate with less attachment.
Oh yeah, like without the coconut butter, I would be okay. You know what I mean?
There was a time when you would have told yourself you shouldn't have had the fat.
No, there'd be a time when, there would definitely be a time when there would be no fat being added to my coffee. But really, it's like, today it's more like if I don't have the coconut butter, I'm not going to freak out. Like if I can still live my life with anxiety. I do it all the time.
But you actually chose consciously and with your conscience to take good care of yourself. That for you sounds like minimizing anxiety where you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Doing what I can, but then knowing at the same time that it's not something that I have total control over.
Well, of course. And I actually, so I really want to thank and acknowledge you for sharing so openly about that, about your food.
I hope it's not boring for people.
Experience. I don't think it'll be boring. My sense is that, I can hardly think of a person in my life who hasn't done some real wrestling with food. And you touched on body. You know, obviously it's not disconnected, our food and diet and then what our bodies look like. People wrestle with that. It's in our culture. And there are so many aspects of life that are connected to food that we didn't touch on in your story that I want to just say, like they're financial, cultural, access. Like there are aspects of food and eating that are maybe even harder. Well, I shouldn't say that because all of this stuff is very hard. Food and eating and body stuff is very sticky, and that you're a person who has had unrest in that area and who is now finding peace there and balance. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not. In a way, that area of life getting better seems like a byproduct of the other work you've been doing in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Like you didn't say to yourself, I've got to recover from this eating trouble.
No.
And hit it head on and do this work in that area. If anything,
I wanted to keep control.
Okay. So really, the relief in that area has come as a byproduct. That in itself is kind of a miracle. And I'm going to say, so I won't share quite as much about my journey with food and eating. I also am a person who has wrestled, done suffering, had it be a disproportionately large focus of my time and attention. And now am not having that experience. Now, just like you said, it has resumed just a kind of what seems like it's appropriate size of attention and time and effort in my life. Maybe not quite as much of a byproduct. I did at a time have to really kind of, or I took it upon myself to kind of more intentionally restore appropriateness to that area. Nonetheless, I am experiencing real peace in that area, which just is, I'm so grateful. I do want to add, I really don't take that for granted, and I don't assume that that will continue to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that requires the same maintenance that we've been talking about with the implementation of the principles of the steps. I strongly suspect if I revert to living just in that dance with myself about, well, what do I want? What do I feel like? I would, quite easily be swept back into confusion and distress in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to add that it was just yesterday I was with my family and we talked a little bit about, well, I have studied food systems in school. It's something I'm really interested in. My husband, I think we've said before, was a cook. We are also big food people. And with my family yesterday, my mom, I don't quite remember what happened, but I got to talking about how I make choices about what we eat. And one of the things I found myself saying was that we eat apples. We eat apples every day in our house. And it's not that I love apples. I mean, some apples are great, but we grow them locally in Washington, and I can buy them from people who I know how they take care of the soil on their farm and how they treat their employees, or know as much as a person can know about labor practices and soil practices without growing myself. And they don't have to get flown all over the world. And, there are all these benefits to eating apples that I value. And so we eat apples. And I wasn't yesterday when I was talking about this, I wasn't thinking, man, I sound so mature. Listen to how mature I am. But this morning, I was considering that a lot of my life, I was not interested in eating apples for no matter how good and reasonable and appropriate it was for me to eat an apple. I didn't want to eat an apple. I wasn't eating an apple. And I do think of that as a sort of maturity. Not like check me out how great I am, but like, man, I'm grateful to have grown into that. It's so cool.
Mm-hmm. I think that's cool too.
Before we come back and talk about workarounds, the ways we work around our barriers so that we can actually practice being responsible and making responsible choices, we are going to pause here to thank and acknowledge our listener, Kate, who has done so much to make this show and our launch a success. Kate, thank you. We're so glad we're doing this together.
Thank you, Kate.
And a hearty welcome and thank you to our first fair citizen contributing at the $30 per month level, who has already been sent his first handwritten thank you card in the mail. And actually that one was handmade too. I should show you, Emily. I made the card.
Sorry, I didn't sign it.
Some custom artwork. Mm-hmm. Oh, honestly, I hadn't thought of that. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I should probably have you sign the cards. Thank you to our first fair citizen. Thank you for everything and for your generous support. And a reminder that all of our patrons at any level of contribution have early access to our episodes. You can find out more at patreon.com/C12Pod. That's C12Pod. Okay, on to our workarounds. So the first thing I think of as like critical component of making responsible choices is to gather the needed information. Just like you were talking about consulting with science base or your dad or your cultural heritage or what you want or what's in the refrigerator, or, it would be impossible and unreal to not gather the needed information. Mm-hmm. We are definitely advocates for ourselves and for others to make sure we have the information that we need before we proceed. I don't think there's anything too complicated about that component. No. Obviously, we could get hung up about it and prolong that period. And I mean, there, in some matters, we could never take in all of that outside information. There's a large supply of information in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but in alignment with our conscience to, a reasonable, appropriate degree of information gathering.
Yes.
That for both of us also includes consulting with people who are informed about the matters at hand. And an addition there would be that the people we consult with, that they are knowledgeable and informed about the issue that we're talking about, but also about who we are and how we want to live.
Otherwise, it's going to be a lot more of that. Those people might be more...
present barriers.
Yeah. Or pulling from their own ideas about what they should do, or external or internal cues, right? Like, really the context needs to be understood fully.
And I don't think it can be said enough how finding people with kind of a vision, like a shared vision isn't quite what I want to say, but to have people in my life who really get me and my deal and my life, there's no replacing that. It's such a gift, and it didn't come automatically. Like, I have had to take a lot of action to form relationships and develop and nurture relationships with people so that we do know what we're about and how we're living and rolling together.
Yeah.
But that is a big key for me. So I don't just, if I need legal advice, personally, I'm not going to any old lawyer. I'm actually going to aim to go to a lawyer who knows me and gets me and how I want to live.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost like cultural appropriateness or something.
Right. Yeah. It is a lot like that.
And I use lawyer because I actually did have to hire a lawyer. I don't remember if I have said it in the show before. I was hit by a car on my bicycle in 2015 and injured. And when I told my lawyer that I just wanted to do what was right, she was a little confused. Like, she usually has clients who want to get as much money as they can. And that wasn't my primary objective in hiring a lawyer. Like, I wanted support to do what was appropriate and right.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to communicate like that and find somebody who was, understood that. And this, this is in play all over my life. So finding the right fit of consultant. And then not to go to my lawyer for information about food, which, that might seem silly, but I think I had hoped, and no offense, Mama, I love you very much, but you're not an expert in all matters. And for sure, like, as a child, I had hoped that I could just go to you for information about everything. Yeah. And it turns out that other people have good information too. Mm-hmm. And now, obviously we are saying we have found that what works is to consult the people who are informed in the area we need to make the decision.
Right.
Our next area of workaround, well, we're going to talk about meditation and prayer. And I realized we haven't really talked very much. We've had like little mentions here and there about prayer, making a prayer here or there or something, and meditation in the show. But we have plenty to say. We have enough already to say that I think our next couple of episodes are going to be specifically about meditation and prayer. That'll be after the follow-up to this show. So episode 11 will be about meditation. And then I think we'll cover prayer after that. So episode 13. Okay, so meditation. I don't want to dig too much into this because, like I said, we're going to do a whole show about it. But I do want to say a lot of people seem to think of meditation as sitting down and being quiet, like an activity. Like, I'm going to meditate now, and then doing meditation, and then concluding the meditation. That's, for a lot of people, that's what meditation is, and that. I agree, that's meditation. I want to share, though, even for now, that while I do that, I meditate, I also value and practice living meditatively.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's totally distinct, but, honestly, my experience is that I can sit down and be quiet for maybe even an hour and do a meditation and kind of get up and be a jerk again. Yeah. And for me, that's not really, that's not that interesting to me to develop that kind of practice. Like, I am way more interested in weaving in living meditatively, which for me includes this being loosely attached throughout how I live, how I live my day, how I do my day.
Yeah.
But often when we feel like we're faced with making a decision, I would say all we do all day ever is make choices. Like that our lives are just made up of a series of choice making.
Mm-hmm.
But when we feel like we have when we like notice, oh, I have this fork in the road or a choice to make here, I do find that can be a time where intentionally sitting down to meditate surrounding that choice can be helpful.
Yes. It's interesting because I'm learning in my doctorate program right now about attention. And like there's two processes. There's level 1 and level 2 or whatever. And one is more immediate, like what we immediately turn our attention to. If like there's a loud sound, we're going to look that way. And then the other one is a lot more deliberate and turning our attention to something. And that is really clicking here as far as like this is a matter of attention. And meditation is a great way to intentionally turn your attention towards something.
Choose what you're going to put your attention on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Even if that's just the process of decision making.
Sure.
Right.
So unsurprisingly to our listeners, I'm a pretty visual person. And a lot of the meditation that I have done and that I still do that I really love, it has a visual component. And one of the meditations that I love around choice making, I guess I call it the table meditation. And I doubt I made this up, but I honest to God can't recall where it came from if I didn't make it up. So write into us if I've stolen your meditation technique and called it my own. But to try to keep it simple, I envision a table and I place all of the pieces of the choice and of my life onto the table. And kind of like the table might be like also seen as an altar. So I'm like putting it on the table for God. So I kind of sometimes imagine like if I want to hold on to something, I would keep it clutched in my hands, and I might even keep it like in my lap under the table. So the meditation is like placing the things on the table. It's similar to like bringing space to them, like, loosening my attachment to them by placing them on the table. So for me, it's not about like spending time looking at all the things or reflecting on the things. Really, it's the act of moving the matters in my life from my grip out into open space for God and conscience and others to view.
Yeah. I
Any
like
questions about that?
Just very relatable. I think we all hold things in our lap. I'm sure I'm holding several bundles of things in my lap right now. A lot of it is, and that's, I think, a lot of why the meditation helps too, is adding to that the intention of kind of giving a good scan of what you might be holding on to that you might want to consider putting on the table. And the great thing about putting things on the table is that you don't have to do anything with it.
Totally.
It's just on the table.
It's just on the table.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. It's just on the table, and you don't have to be gripping at it, or like, that's a lot of less energy. God's not going to be like, oh my God, what's on the table?
How could you put that on the table? Or why
is
wasn't that already on the table?
Right.
Or so many things. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to say this spirit of meditation, what I'm talking about. So I don't do the table meditation every morning, but I do want to be clear that for me, I strive to have a very alive third step practice every day. And for me, that means the equivalent of having everything in my life on the table all the time and doing what it takes to keep it on the table. Next, prayer. I'm sure I'll talk in the upcoming show about it, but I've had a much longer history of prayer. I prayed as a child. I was taught to pray as a child. I still pray. There have been times when I did not pray at all and I only meditated. For me, prayer has been a stickier thing. Prayer made me think I needed to know more about that external supernatural God. Way more. I personally have had far more hang-ups about prayer than I ever had about meditation. That said, and I said very plainly that by many people's standards, I know for talking about God as much as I do, this might sound weird, but that by many people's standards that I am an atheist?
No, I don't think you have.
Okay. So
I agree. I am same.
That by many people's standards that we are atheists who talk a shockingly large amount about God.
Yeah.
It's we get that can be confusing, and we will just continue to talk about ourselves. Neither Emily nor I have anything to hide in this area. In fact, that's the point of the show, is that we want to get this stuff out onto the table for you to share with us and to examine. But all of that aside, I do make prayers. I considered whether to share the exact wording of the prayer that I currently use. And I guess I'm not ready to do that. Prayer does feel quite personal to me. I do use some like bones of established prayers, and there's the third step prayer from the book Alcoholics Anonymous is definitely a commonly used third step prayer. I'm not going to read it on the air, but the message goes basically, we don't even have to go there.
No.
There are so many versions of third step prayers, and even the book Alcoholics Anonymous talks about how the wording of the prayer is optional right after the wording of the prayer. So I have always had a relationship to a third step prayer as though it's the message of the prayer and that I aim for. And like I just said, I have this third step meditation practice that for me, sometimes, I don't know if it supplants a prayer, but I think the thing I really wanted to say here is that I have observed people be so caught up in the prayer that saying the words of the prayer is the only thing in their lives that is a third step, and that's not really a third step. Saying a prayer, it'd be great if it led to surrender, in like actual surrender in our life. But if it doesn't, then I don't know what good it does to make the prayer.
And I've heard a lot of people, that kind of brings me a sense of just like, I believe that people are going to come to a deeper understanding with that prayer. I sure did. And I hear a lot of people talking about how that prayer and just prayer in general was more about the words and not feeling it and not really, connecting with it, and then having that experience where they did. And that's pretty hopeful at some point, right? Yeah.
Not to ignore the value of saying and making prayers as a component of changing our lives, but to stop at just saying words totally would suck.
Right.
To not get the benefits of having the spirit of the prayer being alive in how we live.
Right. And that very spirit kind of which is allowing us to be flexible with the wording itself and not having to be bound to some sort of
rigid.
Yeah.
So the last official workaround that we wanted to make sure we took note of were, I think of it as like structured self-talk. So it's not that the same as that monologue that's just going on and on in my mind all the time. And I'm going to confess, right now in my life, this component of workaround seems to be my go-to. Like, this is what I feel like I count on to help me choose responsibly. So how to explain it? Well, let's say with the latte. So it's my habit that I have a latte. Man, it's our culture that we have a latte. We live in Seattle.
It feels good.
It feels good.
Tastes good.
Sounds good. I can afford it. I don't know. There are all these components, right? But to some extent, the choice is have a latte now or don't have a latte. And to explain this structured self-talk thing, if I was going to strive to check afresh with God or my conscience about whether to have a latte or not, what I would do is I would say to myself, okay, Paige, can I get myself into shape to, if it's the right thing to have a latte, go have a latte? ? And I have to check, am I in shape that if it's the right thing to have a latte, am I ready to go do it? And that one seems yes, I'd like a latte.
Always ready.
Always ready to have a latte. Okay, great. So now we got that down. That fork of the path is good, available, accessible. Okay, let's check the other way. If the right thing for me is to not have a latte, am I prepared and at the ready to not have a latte if that's the right thing? Honestly, often that amount of checking, I'm of course I'm ready to not have a latte. I'm a big, powerful person who's interested in taking good care of myself and doing what's right. And it's not a struggle anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually notice, yes, I'm totally prepared and available to do both.
Right.
It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not that pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice, I know I'm not really in shape to not have a latte, if that's the right thing. And then I can do some follow-up work to deal with what needs to be dealt with so that I can get myself willing and into shape to not have a latte, if that's the right thing.
I still have this thing coming up where it's when is it ever the right thing to have a latte? And I just wanted to share that because it's very external, right? Lattes are expensive and frivolous, and why would it be the right thing? Why would God want me to have a latte? That is definitely a voice that sounds very reasonable to me. Why would? And I think I'm adding that just because that's my experience.
Okay, I'm delighted that you included that.
Mm-hmm. I
think that's very relatable. So I want to say a couple things about that.
Mm-hmm.
To me, this speaks to the scope of your conception of God.
Mm-hmm.
So you're implying that your conception of God isn't into lattes, basically. And along similar lines, I know people who assume God would never want them to have sex or an orgasm,
right?
Or I don't know. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience is that concern is directly linked to not having checked very much.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is that when I check, there's way more space and flexibility than Paige, assumes. Paige is actually pretty rigid. My sense of God, my actual experience of God is not rigid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying God wants you to drink lattes. I'm saying I don't think Emily knows what God wants. And in part, it's that I don't think God has wanted every component of the rest of your life yet.
Mm-hmm.
Again, which is why we check afresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do talk to myself it could be possible that God wants me to have a latte. It could be possible that God wants me to not have a latte.
Mm-hmm.
Am I at the ready to do both?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then after all of these components, the information gathering, including consulting inside and outside stuff, and perhaps some meditation, intentional or living meditatively, and some prayer, and maybe some intentional structured self-talk. Then, after all of that consideration, then I choose how to proceed. Then it's not the reasons It's not the circumstances, the excuses, however good or valid or invalid or bad. It's me living my life between me and God, between me and my conscience. I'm the one who has to go to sleep with myself at night. The Mayo Clinic isn't going to sleep with me and my conscience at night. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't want to place responsibility for how I live onto that outside stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Responsibility, like when you talk about it like that, is, I mean, when you talk about feeling like a whole, more like fully integrated as a person, really, that's kind of the sense that I get when it comes to responsibility. Like being able to stand alone and self-sufficiency and feeling strong and sturdy and,
well, maybe that interdependence thing, appropriate that right. Interdependence. So not on my own, but not over depending on outside stuff. We will undoubtedly come back to these topics again. We definitely will. But before we sign off for today, we want to thank our reviewers. We have had some reviews on iTunes. And I'm just going to thank you by your handles because I don't know how else to do it. So HBJNKO, I don't know how to say that, but thank you for your review. You were our first. And the user Pig Knight and L's Handquarters and H Cooks and Tina C. Mills and Light Abounds. We see you. Your generous reviews are much appreciated. Thank you so much. And for the rest of you, thank you for joining us. This show is not a thing without you. Please find us online and chime in and write to us. We are listening for how to best serve. We're on Instagram, Facebook, SoundCloud, and Twitter. Again, all at C12Pod. That's C12Pod. It looks to us as though our community could really use this content, and we're excited to create and share it. This is a 100% listener-supported show, so if you already like what you're hearing, or even if you don't, but you think what we're up to is good, please contribute through Patreon. And support us by subscribing to the show through whichever tool you use to listen to the show, and submit a review, again, wherever you listen. We are hosting Discord spaces for patrons and will include a Dear Citizen segment in future shows. So support us and write in with your questions about practicing the principles of the steps. Our thanks to each of you who contribute to this work.
Thank you.